All right, we're going to get started in just a moment here. Hey, Sherry. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone out to our city council meeting for our work meeting for Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. We will begin with item 1.1, which is a review of this evening's agenda. Any items that we need to make adjustments to? No? Okay, awesome. We'll move on to future agenda items. I'll turn it over to our city manager first, because I know that you like to update us on things that might be coming up in the future.
We just have two that I'm aware of this evening. One would be the Public Works, Public Safety Building, continuing that discussion from our presentation last time. And in addition to that, UFA and UFSA have reached out to us again about the breathing air compressor piece of equipment that was moved to another station. So we do need to bring that back to you, probably bring that back the next meeting, so.
Does council member have any items they'd like to add to a future agenda item?
More just for your, just an FYI. I did meet with a resident, I think I mentioned it a couple weeks ago, that wants to go through the ordinance as far as agricultural ordinances and anything that applies to that and conflicts with the things. So I'm going to be working with Chase and Michael and just kind of going through those things just so I have a better understanding of the cans and cannots and see if we can bring some suggestions back to adjusting ordinances, because I know we talked a little bit about that when at this last request for a rezone. I think that we need to make sure if we're going to call something agriculture, we're in harmony with that, with the ordinances and the things we allow. So just FYI.
Okay.
And FYI to Michael and Chase.
Surprise. I do have one item that I would like to have the council address as we are looking at the standards for the city, as we've all been looking through that wonderful 500-page document. I think as I was looking at it and reviewing it and talking it over with staff, I think there's some places in that the items that are in there are more of a policy issue and should be more under code than they should be under a standards manual. And I would be looking for staff when they bring this back to bring us some suggestions of where some things might be better suited to be in our code, as it would fall under the jurisdiction of this council more than just a decision from an engineering body. And because I think those policy items really should be more in the code versus the actual standards, which should be done by engineering. So I have asked staff if they would, when they come to make their presentation, bring us some recommendations on that, on what might be and might not be appropriate to move in that. So I just wanted to make the council aware of that if they have any concerns.
Mayor, I have one other thing about the general plan, and I apologize. I know some of it was at the combined meeting I wasn't at last time, but I feel a little bit disconnected from this process. It feels like the Planning Commission had lots of opportunities to hammer through it in different meetings and things like that. I don't think that we've had a lot of really in-depth opportunity to hammer through all that. I know we're going through into the public portion of it, but can I just get a physical copy of it so I can go through and make some good notes and really give?
Would you provide a physical copy to all the members of the council, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that, Sherry. I'd like one as well, so that's a good point. Any other items for future agenda? Okay, we'll move on to our leadership task list review. Any items that list that we get sent out to us from staff, any things that we need to address at this time? Okay, we appreciate staff's effort on making sure that is detailed enough that we can understand what's going on, and it's been fantastic, so thank you very much. We will move on to item 2.1, discussion pertaining to the Planning Commission appointments. Michael. Oh, I surprised him. I'm going to get us through tonight, Michael. Somebody's got somewhere to be.
So as stated in your packets, we have 3 planning commissioners, regular planning commissioners whose terms of service is completed this month. Andy Powell in District 2, Brody Ripon in District 3, and then Jackson Ferguson in District 4. Again, these are regular appointees to the Planning Commission. Their terms of service is for a 3-year term. They have been serving well. They have attended our meetings very regularly. and they have expressed interest in continuing their service on the Planning Commission. If it's the council's pleasure, we would prepare, I believe it's a resolution for your consideration at a future regular meeting for consideration to reappoint each of these 3 members to another regular term on the commission. Any questions or concerns, or?
I have one question. I didn't see it in any information. Is there any cases of negative public feedback regarding any of these commissioners or their actions or policies over the past 3 years?
Nothing that comes to mind on these 3 particular commissioners. I could certainly double check our records, emails, and see if there is any particular concern on a project.
I haven't
But I
heard
don't
anything.
recall.
Just curious if there was something that was a profound issue. I'd maybe want to do a little bit of research on that before I would fully support. I think they've all done a good job. I don't really have any reservations, but I just want to make sure that we're complete in that process of listening to public opinion about it.
Okay.
I'll just say that I'm supportive of, again, barring anything that we're not aware of, but I don't anticipate that in any means, but I'm supportive of reappointing each of these 3 individuals, having, them having been on for a few years, and they've all been very dedicated individuals to that, and I think that they've done a good job, and if they have a desire to continue to serve, I certainly support that.
And I'll double check again. It's been a little while since we've asked the planning commissioners on future reappointments, and they all express interest, but I'll just verify that nothing has changed in the last couple of months as far as their interest in serving again, so.
This is kind of a weird thing, but there's no term limits on them either. They can just
No.
go and go and go and go, right?
That is correct. It's all subject to reappointment to the city council or by the city council.
And I guess really the term limit is if the elected officials don't decide that there needs to be a change, then that's how the public input is.
Yeah, and there certainly there shouldn't be any shame or, if there is a decision to not reappoint, there's an opportunity to maybe add a different perspective or maybe different representation in the city. I've tried to look at where people live, our commissioners live in the community. I'm concerned about that, having different viewpoints. So, it's just what the council believes is best for our planning commission.
And I would clarify that I don't have any objection for these 3 either. I think they've done a great job and appear to have been thorough in the things that they do. I was just curious more than anything. Thank you.
Michael, do you know, excuse me, these 3 individuals, have they all served a full 3-year term at this point? Or did any of them actually come in partway through an existing term and finish it out?
All 3 of these were appointed on the same meeting, and they all served full terms.
I thought that was the case, but I couldn't remember for sure. That's outstanding.
Just for future, can you provide the council in an email or something that gives us just a quick breakdown of all the current planning commissioners, how long they've been serving, and how much they have left in their term, and whether or not they're alternates or not? I know that we've had, we used to have a lot of turnover on our planning commission. We were always struggling to keep that full. And now it seems that we've got some alternates that have been for quite some time. And so the only thing that I would want to consider is possibly giving some individuals some opportunity to be full members of the planning commission, and maybe asking somebody to be an alternative.
To switch, become an alternate?
Just to give that opportunity to dedicated members who have been serving as alternates for years. And so that would be the only thing that I think I might be looking at, but in regards to these specific 3 individuals, I don't necessarily have any concerns, but I think as we move forward, I think it behooves us to have a conversation regarding that, so.
And I would just add to that as you're gathering some of that data, I think that that's appropriate to certainly ask for. But I think one of the things that we find too is that it'd be interesting to see how many times all alternates are actually sitting in place of somebody else. If it seems that they're all getting really, because of life in general, ample opportunity to sit and function in that, then I have less of a concern. then maybe, the other. But if it's easy to really kind of identify that data, that would be helpful.
I think
And I
we
think
can do
that,
that.
I think that the turnover has decreased significantly since I was removed
You
from the,
left,
yeah,
yeah,
since
I
I
mean,
left.
I
So I
think
think it's been better.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
I think if there's anybody, I just would like to know on that as well, if there's any concerns regarding attendance or anything.
Yes, and to the mayor's question, we do have, following this, we do have some reappointments on our alternates because they serve for 1 year at a time. So if there's an interest in maybe changing roles from a regular to an alternate, that could be an option for the council as well. So I'll make sure you have all that information for your consideration.
Thank you. Any further discussion by this body? Okay, thank you, Michael. We appreciate it. We will move on to item 2.2, legislative session review. Tammy Moody, our assistant city manager, Cody Stromberg, our deputy police chief, and Chris Bleak, who's our lobbyist up on the Hill. So I'm going to turn it over to Tammy first, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. So I'll just take a few minutes before I turn the time over to Chris Blake. I think that it's honest to be said that 2021 legislative session was one of the toughest and most unique sessions that we have experienced. Virtual meetings and limited in-person contact definitely posed challenges to communication. I think that this year our communication with our senators and representatives was mainly done through emails and texts, and sometimes you didn't know if they really got your emails or texts until you were listening to a committee meeting and you heard them quote something that you had written and you were like, oh, yay, they really did get the city's position on this item. This year there were 1,216 bills requested. 767 bills were numbered, and 503 bills were passed. So it was a very busy session for being a very different session. Now that the session has concluded, staff are busy examining how some of the bills that were passed could impact the work that's being done in our cities. As we evaluate those, we will determine if any of them impact our processes or our ordinances, and if any changes are necessary, then we will bring those back to the council. As expected, the pandemic took center stage of this session, and a lot of the bills were designated towards some sort of assistance or relief based on the impacts of the pandemic. So we saw bills that addressed mental health issues, not just for first responders, but for the general public. We also saw bills that provided business assistance and, really focused on how to make sure that our economic development and that business support is provided in efforts to help them continue to sustain and stay open. And then, of course, the bills that we expected, bills that align with economic development, housing, public safety, which was a very big topic this year, voting procedures, and of course, local government responsibilities. So the highlights of this session included $23.8 million in ongoing money for economic development, $39 million for trails, recreation, and parks, $50 million for homelessness and housing, $1.2 billion in infrastructure, and $200 million for building construction of colleges and universities. And we're happy to note that among those, the Salt Lake Community College Harriman campus was a priority for funding this year. They were a priority for funding last year, but the pandemic led to kind of a realignment of those priorities. So this year it was brought back, and again, they were able to be placed as a priority and assigned $30 million in efforts to get their first building out of the ground. I know that they are looking at 2023 as a goal to get that started. This session did not come without the threats to quality of life that local governments work so hard to provide for their communities. SB 61, outdoor advertising, was a bill that threatened local control for electronic signage, making it possible for billboards to upgrade to an electronic sign regardless of size or location. SB 204, permitting amendments, interfered with local government process and created an unfunded mandate. So together with the Utah League of Cities and Towns and other municipalities, we stood against these bills and we were able to succeed in those efforts so that they did not go through. Another bill that posed a question for local governments this year was HB 98 in regards to local government building regulations. The initial draft of this bill offered an opt-out for developers when it came to plan review and inspections, and it also wanted to reduce design guidelines that cities could impose. After a lot of back and forth on this bill and negotiations, I believe there was a fourth amendment that passed that still allowed for an opt-out for developers, but it was only if cities were unable to meet the designated timelines for those inspections and reviews. Transportation and infrastructure funding, they experienced great strides in gaining support from the state this year. So I would like to turn the time over to our local lobbyist, Chris Blake, to touch on some of the transportation and infrastructure as well as the housing bills that were proposed and went through this session.
Thanks, Tammy. Good to be here with you. I was a little nervous when I saw Chase. He looks like he's well hydrated and ready to go. That is a serious major league Red Bull he's got going tonight. Tammy did a great job kind of giving an overview. Let me just note a couple of key things that are happening from my perspective. This, I think, was a challenging issue, or challenging session for municipalities, for the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and I want to commend Cameron Deal and his team for the work they did. And that goes for Tammy and a number of other people. But I think what you're seeing right now is a little bit of a collision course between infrastructure spending, affordable housing, and how those issues get played out. Obviously, cities play an important role in that work. There's a private sector component, which has a great deal of representation on the Hill as it relates to developers and builders, and then the state has been and showed a willingness to spend even more money related to infrastructure spending, and they want to see how can they best utilize and make sure that that money that's coming for infrastructure, whether that be in roads or transit or what we're seeing now, active transportation or parks, other sort of quality of life amenities. How can they make sure that they see that there is sufficient affordable housing? So we saw both efforts that failed as well as efforts that have succeeded and could be positives for the state, but will obviously be challenges. I mean, as the state talks about creating opportunities for greater density, I realize that creates problems for municipalities and for city councils when they start looking at those developments. And so I think we're going to continue to see this tug and pull happen with the legislature. But I think kind of one of the key themes of this session, and generally ended in a good spot, but I think there's going to be a lot more discussion, and I would encourage you to remain involved both through the league and other avenues as those discussions continue. A lot of good news, however. Tammy obviously mentioned the Salt Lake Community College building. I might note, I think it was my first project that I worked on was helping getting funding for that road where that building will be built. And so it's certainly exciting to see that move forward. It's my understanding they'll be breaking ground here, as soon as they can come July 1. And that's obviously great news for Harriman City and for this part of the valley. There were two significant bills dealing with mainly road, some transit and active transportation infrastructure, House Bill 244 and House Bill 433. As Tammy mentioned, House Bill 433 is a significant bonding bill and really is a major benefit for I'd say even specifically the southwest part of the valley. If you start to look at the TIF list, the Transportation Investment Fund list, you see a number of projects that are happening and will be accelerated here in the southwest part of the valley, mainly along Bangerter Highway. And it's my understanding that UDOT is also going to commence a study on the sequencing of Bangerter Highway to look at how best they can move these interchanges forward that are both on the TIF list, as well as a specific project that was called out within the bill itself, and that's 134 South. And I think a lot of credit goes to our legislators in this perspective, including Representative Perucci and Representative Tusher, who made special note of that and worked hard to get that included on the list itself. Obviously, there were 2 lanes included, called out specifically on U-111 from Harriman Parkway to 118 South, which I know you all know well. A couple of other key things just to be aware of. Point of the Mountain received $5 million for the continuation of its environmental study and engineering for the transit line extension out of the prison property that will wrap into Utah County. The reason I mention that is we've talked here about what type of connections can we make between the Point of the Mountain extension as that continues and then the end of the South Jordan line that comes in, and how that might start to wrap around and connect, prove another connection through Riverton and back into the prison property. There was also significant money pledged, upward, I think it was $300 million for double tracking a front runner, and which will be a big positive there. I also want to note a lot of money, and I was just talking with Blake about this, for active transportation, trails, parks, these types of things, which will help reduce the required local match for some active transportation. So I think in the very near future, we'll be working with staff to make sure we get with Natalie Gochner, who is the Transportation Commissioner for this area, make sure we start to highlight some of the opportunities and amenities that exist here in Harriman and can move forward. Also might note, the quarter of the quarter, this is House Bill 244, so one of the original transit quarters, a piece got sliced off many years ago that has been sort of funded for different projects. So for example, the road where the Salt Lake Community College building, we were able to access that money. We've accessed it for Harriman and other places. They have made a change in that and will be, for the next 15 years, there will be $800,000 coming to Harriman. And that will be money that can be spent, probably bonded against, some things that we should look at in terms of accelerating some infrastructure here. I know just in talking with staff, you know, there has been, I think there should be discussion around that auto mall property, working with UDOT, and there might be some ways that we can utilize that money to help accelerate that project as well. I might note there was also money in there for a parking structure here in South Jordan at the UTA track station. Once again, another opportunity to start looking at, okay, what are those next steps now that we have greater access and facilities there. Any questions on any of those before I move on? Okay. Going back to some of the housing bills, I think Tammy did a good job of talking about those. Let me mention where the league, and that includes Harriman City, spent a lot of time this session was on House Bill 82, which was the accessory dwelling unit bill. Got that to a place where it does encourage development, but was not as onerous or as top-down heavy as the current bill is, but I suspect this will be an ongoing discussion. I'm going to need to continue to get up to speed with what our ADU policy is here in Harriman so that we can continue to address it. I think we're actually in pretty good shape there. The other one that I think is really interesting is House Bill 217. This is the Housing and Transit Reinvestment Zone Act. This may not specifically help Harriman in the immediate future, but the goal of this is to help create incentives, including state and local taxes, to densify projects around transit stations. And there's some really significant things that have happened here. My business partner, Rob Jolly, worked night and day on this bill, and one that I want to sit down with the staff about as he looks at making additional changes to potentially grow the opportunity to use this as a way to densify projects that might be happening around, whether it be transit hubs or other types of state infrastructure. That certainly is the potential opportunity there. Let's see, I'll mention a couple of bills, Senate Bill 65 and House Bill 151. These are kind of in that same vein, opportunities with the State Infrastructure Bank and community reinvestment zones to continue to find ways to really densify or create, take advantage of the infrastructure that's happening in our city and better utilize that or create greater investment around those areas. So some other areas, I know in talking with Blake just now, he's already looking at some opportunities there, and so good things there. I'll just note, there were a number of bills dealing with outdoor advertising and billboard restrictions, as well as a bill that popped up at the last minute on short-term rental amendments that would have changed the way some of those policies work. Those bills ultimately did fail. The outdoor advertising amendments were quite the slugfest by a number of folks on those issues, but did not pass. But I guess it's a rite of passage that those come back every legislative session. And then finally, just note, certainly want to thank Senator McKay, Senator Fillmore, who spent a great deal of time on a number of these issues, particularly on the bonding and quarter bills. I think they deserve their due credit on those issues. A couple of things just to be aware of here as we go into the interim and things to look forward to I want to put on your radar. One obviously is, I was just having some conversations with the Speaker's Chief of Staff today, as well as Cam Deal from the Utah League. As I understand it, the state is roughly going to get from this COVID-19 relief bill $1.7 billion to the state, and I believe that includes the money that is coming to municipalities, as well as $700 million to schools. I'm not quite sure where and how we're going to spend all that money. I'm sure there's going to be some ideas, but my understanding from Cameron is that he will be sending out a spreadsheet tomorrow where cities can have kind of a guesstimate on the allocation that they'll be receiving. But that is a lot of money that's going to be coming to the state after a huge amount of money and stimulus that they just spent. Another issue that we'll be starting here this year is redistricting. I think this is an area that we should probably have some conversations in Harriman City right now. As you all know, we have 3 senators. Senator Andrade comes in and picks up just a small portion on the north end, and then 2 state representatives, if I'm not mistaken, Representative Tusher and Perucci. Obviously, with the growth in Harriman, I think it's worth having the conversation. What does Harriman City want in that? I personally am a proponent of having more people in your city, even if it's only a portion. I know some cities like, kind of their own dedicated person, but certainly something that is going to start popping. Normally would get it moving a lot faster, but because of some of the census estimates, I suspect that issue is going to move a little bit slower here as we get started this year. But that is something to be looking forward to and starting to think about as we move forward. And then obviously mask mandates, issues related to COVID-19. You've probably seen the bill that dealt with those issues does end the mask mandate on April 10th. We'll see what kind of dynamics that plays out, and then they set kind of some standard or framework for ending some of the emergency order, which could have some impacts in other ways, just in terms of how we conduct our city meetings and do some of those kinds of things. And so some things that I'm sure your team's preparing for, but just be aware of at a high level. So happy to answer any questions.
Did Senator Maine's SB 201 pass?
Say that again.
Did Senator Maine's SB 201 pass, the public notice one?
SB 201. I don't know. I would have to look up SB 201. What is SB 201?
The public notice amendment. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Oh. Okay.
Thanks.
Am I
Thanks for
turning
your
it over to
work up
Cody?
there. One quick question for you, Chris. I mean, obviously, the next legislative session is still a long time off and a lot of things to get through. But based on how they conducted this session, what, I guess, long-term changes do you foresee moving forward in the legislative session process as a result of what we had to do this year?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilmember Smith. Maybe this is starting to get the old man in me talking. I hope that very little. There were some conveniences, obviously. I mean, as we see virtual meetings and some of the opportunities to do some things, I suspect we will see the opportunity for public comment. And, they've always been pretty good about streaming the meetings and doing those kinds of things, but having greater participation or being able to engage in that way, I suspect some of those types of things will continue. It makes sense to do it. It relieves even just simple things like parking at Capitol Hill, where a lot of people don't have to come up but can still express an opinion and feel like they're being heard. Some of the other things I think the legislature is ready to throw right out the window and get back to normal, whatever that means. It was an interesting dynamic. I mean, I spent probably about 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 on the Hill, 1/3 off. Even when you were up there aren't a lot of places to land right now. I mean, the cafeterias, some of those types of spaces have been taken out. They did allocate money for a new north building. So what used to be called the state office building on the north end of Capitol Hill complex will be coming down, and a new legislative building will be going up in its place. And so I think some of those sort of landing spaces that went away for this session will return, and there's certainly an expectation that will happen. But it was an odd feeling to be in the Capitol. I mean, they would be in the middle of heated debate, and it would feel like a ghost town up there. And I think most legislators, are sort of social creatures, and so didn't necessarily enjoy that component of it. And I suspect they'll be ready to move back to something resembling normal while keeping some pieces that help with public engagement or some of those things. But by and large, I think there's a desire to return to something resembling normal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Good to see all of you.
Just to kind of put things in perspective, we anticipated a busy year going into this session from the public safety standpoint, and of the 503 bills that were passed, 101 of them had a law enforcement or criminal justice component. And so we were busy this year. Probably, I wasn't quite as busy as Chris, but certainly way more busy than we normally are. So I highlighted a few of them in the staff report that Tammy sent out, and I don't necessarily want to go through each one of them individually. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Really what we went into with this session was to try and get a grip on what the concepts were, what we were trying to drive towards. Obviously, there's national discussions and statewide discussions and local discussions going on in relation to police reform, some of the use of force issues that we're seeing, government transparency, some of those things we anticipated. We definitely had some difficult conversations along that way, but by and large, I feel like we ended up in a really good place. And what we were able to successfully navigate was, if we can identify things that are implementable both at the local and state level to standardize and to come up with baseline standards for what our profession should look like, right? And I'll give you an example. A bill that passed that requires, that Senator Thatcher ran, that requires minimum use of force standards for the state. It requires the Peace Officer Standards and Training or Post Academy to develop minimum use of force standards. That didn't exist prior to this session. Every agency was kind of left to develop their own use of force standards and adhere to them and make sure that their officers adhered to them, but nobody really had the conversation of what is a minimum use of force standard, what should that look like, what's a template for what's acceptable. And the reality is, as we talk about some of these issues, we are driven by the community's engagement. We police the community the way that they expect to be policed. And so these conversations are important. As you know, from the very beginning of HPD, Chief Carr has been very open about his progressive mindset and about doing things in a way that is beneficial to the community, and certainly not because that's the way we've always done it, right? And so a lot of what we saw was training-related bills relative to mental health, crisis intervention, implicit bias, some canine standards, use of force, basically the codification of some best practices. And for your information and for the members of the public that are listening, with 95% of that, our department was already in compliance. And that's something, like I said, that Chief Carr was very passionate about from day one, about getting out ahead of some of this stuff and recognizing that our profession is changing, and we have an obligation to our community to be more transparent and to make sure that we're adhering to those minimum standards and to good practices. So the codification of best practices is important. We actually were able to successfully get some money funded for training statewide. One of the biggest complaints of most of us is unfunded mandates, right, Chris and Tammy? We hate unfunded mandates, but the state actually ponied up some money for some of these training components to help out agencies. A lot of bills relative to reporting and data. That's another area that, sad to say, we've not been great at in our profession. There's no central data repository in the state for things like use of force and forced entry warrants, where somebody is actually paying attention to what's going on a statewide basis. And so the codification of some of those best practices is certainly important. And transparency. One of the things that Chief Carr has been very passionate about is recognizing that it's incumbent on us as leaders in law enforcement to hold people accountable, right? And those so-called bad apples of our profession, we can't just blame the negative sides of our profession on them and then not doing anything about it to remove those from the profession, those people who don't deserve to wear the badge because they tarnish it, right? And so we were able to successfully pass a couple of bills that make it easier for us to hold those people accountable. And I'll give you an example. One of the issues that we ran into with officers leaving one agency and going to another, some cities and some agencies, attorneys were making those people sign non-disclosure agreements because of discipline or whatever else had happened at that agency. When I go to do a background check on an officer, if there's an NDA that's present, I can't get access to that information legally. And so it made it difficult for us to be able to identify some of those issues ahead of time. And so we were able to successfully get some information and some legislation passed that allows us access to that data so that we can properly vet those people that we're going to allow to wear the badge. So really, as we go into the interim, a couple of topics I just want to draw your attention to, and they're important and they're ongoing discussions, and they're probably going to take a while to resolve, but relative to the use of force, how is it documented? There were several use of force bills that came through that didn't get passed, but there were some very crucial conversations that happened in relation to those, and so those discussions will continue into the interim, and I suspect that you'll see at least a handful of use of force related bills that come up in the next session or throughout the interim period. And again, as we've gone through all those discussions and looked at the practices that are trying to be codified, just to give you some assurance and confidence that our department is already compliant. We over-report the use of force. We report the show of force, as you've heard the chief say, which is certainly not a common standard, even in the state of Utah as well, to document that information. Forced entry warrants is a topic of question that came up, and there's a lot of legal ramifications. There's a lot of dynamics that go into forced entry warrants, and so that's a discussion that we felt was best had in the interim to make sure that we're coming up with best practices and adopting things that are not only beneficial to the community and promote transparency, but also protect the safety of our officers who are serving those warrants. So that's important to us. And then a national discussion that certainly touched home as well is the discussion on qualified immunity. And the reality is that that's also an important discussion for us to have at the local level. Because as we start talking about qualified immunity and what does it mean to do everything right as an officer and still be civilly liable for that, it makes it very difficult for us to imagine a future and being able to recruit and retain qualified and competent people to police our streets. And so although we feel like we're in a good place on all those topics, those are discussions that are certainly going to continue to be had, and we'll push through some working groups and some other information and see what we come up with as a solution. So Did you have any questions specifically on anything that was highlighted or anything that I can answer for you from a law enforcement
Yeah,
perspective?
Deputy Chief, you said that of these items and these standardizations that we're putting in, Herman PD is already 95% compliant. Can you give us any ideas to the reason we would not be compliant on the other 5%?
Really, it's just about the nature of the conversation that's had, right? So if we report a certain type of use of force, for example, if our policy requires us to report every time we point a gun at somebody, but not every time that we point a taser at somebody, but the discussion is, should we be reporting every time we point a taser at somebody? That's an example of something that maybe is not already in our policy, but we certainly adopt as best practice as well.
So you would say it's more of a finding the best practices and quantifying what those practices are so that we can.
And it's difficult, right? We don't
Yeah.
know what the quantifying of those practices look like until the discussions are had. So, but we're certainly on a much better track than I would argue most agencies in the state. And that's in large part due to, again, Chief Carr's push for progressive thinking and making sure that we're doing things the right way for the right reason from day one.
And I think the statement there and the question there is not to in any way insinuate that I think anything other than the highest of our officers,
Yeah.
because we are doing those things.
Yeah.
I also know that that the officers are always doing their best to try to find those things that they can do better. And so having these conversations where it does become quantified and does become something that they do develop a standard, we can now follow it. And I know that you and the entire team will do that as best as they have the ability to do so.
And things like implicit bias and de-escalation, we've trained all of that since day one. It's really just about codifying it and about developing the minimum standard and the best practice, and really about us having a seat at the table as we talk about what our profession looks like moving forward, which is also important.
Are there any other questions for the chief?
I would just tell you, I will just publicly say the qualified immunity thing, it saddens me that we see that legislation in our state. And I'm not exactly sure which legislator ran the bill, but I just feel like our law enforcement officers in the state and across the nation put their lives on the line every day for the safety of our communities. And there are already processes in place that help deal with officers who shouldn't wear the badge. And so to take away the immunity from all the ones who should wear the badge is just simply the wrong path, in my opinion. And I've expressed that also to our legislators and things like that, because I just believe it's the wrong conversation. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it gets us to where we need to get. I just would publicly want to state that.
And I'll just add to that, Sherry, that possibility of qualified immunity going way crosses further than just in law enforcement, because it crosses into the fire side as well, as you have law enforcement certified fire investigators and those types of things. And so it starts to become a huge issue, especially for, entities to be able to protect those individuals. And I agree with your comments. And Representative King that brought up that bill, I think he caught a lot of very angry people, maybe a good way to put it, right off when that bill hit. And I know that we were part of that, in my profession on the fire service side as well. But I don't think that it's something that's going to just go away anytime soon either.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yep.
Nope, that's it. Thanks, Cody. I have one other before we move off of this, not specifically for you, though. I really wanted to thank you to Susan with the chamber. She set up the legislative Saturday morning updates. Those are a huge blessing and a benefit to us, and thank you to all the legislators who hopped on those calls. There were several, 10 to 15 legislators will get on those calls every Saturday morning, and I thank them for spending their Saturday mornings updating local elected officials, so we understood and were able to give them feedback in one location. It becomes difficult, especially with the way the session was this year, to express that. So really big thanks to the chamber for setting that up and all the legislators for participating in that, and big shout out to our own local legislators. Had many conversations with most of them, and I really appreciate the engagement that they have with our community.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, can I follow up with a question on this? There was some discussion about HB 82 and the ADU that was going back and forth. Do you want us to bring that back on a work meeting in the future? Okay.
With at least an update of where we stand and how our city is affected. I'm not sure we're looking, I think we had a conversation via email that we're not necessarily looking to make any major or drastic changes, but at least we need a place to start with and knowing exactly how we are affected as a city.
And maybe in a broader context, there would be an opportunity to just have maybe a summary report on administrative policies that might have had to change as a result of the bills passed in this legislative session. Just want to see what's going on in our city and how we're reacting to this stuff.
Any other comments? Tammy, is there anything else for us that you have? No.
The way that we do our processes or our policies, we'll definitely make sure that
I'm sure I speak on behalf of the council when I express our gratitude for the efforts that our staff puts in for the legislative session each year. It's an extremely important thing, and we're grateful for those efforts that you put through. With that, we will move on to item 2.3, discussion regarding the Wasatch Front Waste and Recycling District creation of a local district.
Oh, is that me? I just see I was like,
I'm also happy to jump in.
just assumed Chase was going to
Yeah.
run at this, and thank you for bringing this up, and I'll give it to Chase. You guys have seen in your packet, and we've discussed at length about changing to a local district from a special service district. I explained before that it enables us to limit a level of bureaucracy, really, that's not necessary. We still have elected representation on these types of boards, so our citizens are still represented. It saves money. It makes the process more efficient. And Chase, I'll ask you, you look through the legal document. Do you have any concerns or questions with that?
I don't. What they provided us is just a resolution that essentially permits them to make that change, right? Each member district or each member entity has to approve the change from a special service district to a local district. And the resolution, again, that they provided us is just that, just confirms that Harriman City is fine making that change.
Are there any entities that have not been in support of this that we're aware of?
We were just asked to take it to our councils this month, and we'll be discussing it. It's March, so we'll be discussing it in our board meeting towards the end of the month. But our board has to be unanimous. We can't have a majority. We have to be unanimous, and so it has to ultimately be approved at the county. But before we actually go to the county, we want to make sure our board is unanimously supporting it. So each board member was asked to come back to their own individual councils and get a resolution that says we would support it, so we know if we have a unanimous vote to move forward. So
My understanding of going through the packet is that, to your point, that really the county council is the one that ultimately has to approve it. And what we're really looking is to send a unified message to them that all of the members of that district are supportive of that move, to then encourage the council to take that step and allow that process to happen. Is that accurate?
Absolutely right.
Okay.
And that's the layer of bureaucracy that Councilmember Warren mentioned would be eliminated, right? As a special service district, they're still governed by, they answer to the county. And by becoming a local district, they would eliminate that level of control, and it would simply become an independent local district.
Yeah, and I will share with you that one concern that was brought up by Board Member Bradley was he was concerned that it creates another district that would have taxing authority. Our district is not structured for taxes. We don't tax and things like that. And I feel like that's mitigated by the fact that we all represent our local communities. And so before we're going to be able to pass that along, we're going to have to be able to talk to our residents about that. And there's no intention at all to exercise taxing authority. But just saying that, there's no current intention. I don't anticipate there ever being some, but just know that that was a voiced concern. I'm not concerned about it, but I would let you all know that that was a concern. But obviously, he's a council member from the county.
So we would just bring that back for the discussion and action item agenda at the next meeting if council's comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Any objections to that by the council?
Or the consent agenda even, yeah.
Consent agenda would
Consent
probably
would
more
be great.
appropriate.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Chase.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move on to item 2.4, discussion of a franchise agreement with Paul Murdoch for high-speed internet services. Chase and Blake.
Thank you. So this would now be a few months ago, we were approached by Paul Murdoch, who is a resident of High Country, I believe. He owns a business that provides fiber and high-speed internet services in the area. He has approached us, asking us to maybe consider entering into a franchise agreement with him whereby he would be able to come in and provide those telecommunications services within the city. The state allows cities and municipalities to enter into a franchise agreement with businesses and tax them for telecommunication services. It is governed largely by state statute. We also have a local ordinance that permits this type of franchise agreement to take place. It sets the rate at 3.5% of the monthly fee that is collected by the telecommunications company. That's paid to the Utah State Tax Commission, which is then paid to us. It would be for a term of 10 years, renewable after that 10-year period for one 5-year period. It is very similar to the franchise agreement that we already have in place with Comcast for the same services. This would just be with another business offering the same services. Are there any questions? It's a pretty straightforward agreement. I mean, there's a lot of technical minutia about the services that they would provide, but what we are considering and what's before you tonight is just that agreement between us and the.
Do we have any information on this business that I've never heard of?
Yeah, that's my question is this person's background, sophistication, do they have insurance and bonding? Are they capable
Who are they
of
providing
doing
to
all this?
now?
So that's all a
kind of
requirement
What's
of
the
the.
definition of high speed?
Yeah, that was my question.
So it's all defined in the state statute, what those types of services are, what's taxable, what isn't. The telecommunication.
What is he providing?
What is he providing?
That's what-
Fiber. He's providing high speed fiber services. You had a question, council member.
Yeah, primarily just related to the, sophistication of this
Sure.
business, their bonding, licensing, their technical prowess, their ability to actually, deliver this inside of the city, dealing with all of our engineering requirements, all of those types of things, so.
So that's all critical to this. It comes after, and that's all covered in the franchise agreement, that they apply for permits, that those permits be approved by our engineering department, that they be bonded and insured for those projects that they would be involved in, and that they're required, again, by the franchise agreement to comply with all of those requirements of the city from an engineering perspective.
From a city standpoint, I know that we have, for lack of a better term, pipes in the ground that would facilitate running of infrastructure. Would this franchise agreement limit our ability to welcome other businesses in the future?
It's a non-exclusive agreement, so it
But
would be up
would
to
we
you
have-
whether or not you.
Takes space.
But it takes space. If we only have 4 pipes in the ground that we can run 4 wires through, and one of them's already full and we're filling up a second one, are we preventing ourselves from an opportunity in the future?
So that is one thing that we can actually consider here and may be advisable. I know there's a conduit sharing program that Blake's mentioned before where you can require contractors who are working within public rights of way to install additional conduits for subsequent companies to come in and use so that they don't have to tear up the street again and install their own conduits for that purpose.
So, yeah, for me, in regards to this, I mean, I'm all for giving people the opportunity, if there's not risk to the city, giving people the opportunity to spend their private funds and come in and provide a service to a private residence. That doesn't bother me at all. The only concern I have is, are we preventing ourselves from that in the future? And if we're not, that's great. So I would just ask that this item moves forward, that be specifically addressed for this body.
I'll just reiterate my specific questions are, I want to know more about this company. Who are they? Never heard of them before. Who are they? What's the current footprint? How many customers do they have? And what services are they currently providing? What do they have? What are their plans for this type of expansion if a franchise agreement is granted? I mean, with no information on who they are, what they're doing, or how, I'd have to say no.
And I don't know, Blake might have a little more technical information about it. Paul is one of my neighbors. He lives, I know him well. I don't know exactly how large the company is. I know he does a substantial amount in high country and those types of areas that it's harder, that the big Comcast and things like that won't come in. It's kind of his niche to try and help areas that some of the larger providers won't provide to them. And he comes in, just bores underneath and a few things like that. You probably know a little bit more about his particular company.
So he buys broadband wholesale from one of the main providers. And so he buys a big chunk, and then he comes in and puts the infrastructure in, and it's basically one conduit. And Mayor, you're right. I mean, he takes up real estate in the ground in the public utility easement. They all have their requirements to be a certain distance away from each other. So in that PUE, you have Rocky Mountain Power and Dominion Energy, Dominion Gas, and you'll have Comcast, CenturyLink, and possibly Paul Murdoch all running over in the side. So they might all be shared. The communications people might all fit in one trench, but that there is a risk in the future that we may want to get in there and put a conduit in ourselves. And
Or if somebody bigger comes in and wants to provide a better, bigger service, and we're stuck with a 15-year.
there's always that. I think he has a couple hundred customers right now, and where he buys a block of broadband, I guess, so to say. It's a little outside of my technical knowledge on it, but that's the way I understood it, was you buy a block, and then you service these people, and as you service it, you keep using some of that bandwidth that you have. And so he has a whole interface that he looks at and tracks, and he can track all their speeds, and as soon as he gets down to a certain speed, he has to buy another block to service more people. So he's very cognizant of where his speeds are at, and that if he drops too low, they'll just go over to Comcast or CenturyLink to beat the speeds and get a cheaper price. So that's how I understand how it works.
I have a question too, that in reference to this, because I think you had mentioned this in a meeting we had a couple months ago, that his installation ability in high country estates is somewhat eased because they're not finished roads, and that there's an easement installation to a dirt road. This would be different installing through city streets and public, right-of-way easements and stuff, or utility right-of-way easements. Do we have an understanding of how he would look to do this, and the specifics of machinery and standards and all of that kind of stuff? I think there's a general support for companies that want to come in and try and provide service to our unserviced residents. I think that's great. Okay. But I also think we have a responsibility to make sure that we're allowing companies that are licensed, bonded, technically able, financially stable, able to do all those things to actually back up those services that are going to be provided.
And it won't restrict their ability to provide.
Yeah, not to mention that other stuff.
Because I think the other things are already covered. They have to be all those things.
They do have to be all those things. The franchise agreement does require that of them.
Yeah.
Additionally, we would also require that at the permitting stage, right? When they would bring in plans and design, we would collect a bond up front for that project or projects that they would be working on, and require proof of insurance as well.
So I think the biggest issue for this body at this time is that we're just simply naive in regards to this. This is not our wheelhouse. This is not our expertise. So because we understand that we lack in that particular area, we are maybe being extra cautious to ensure that we're not giving up an opportunity later. So if staff could help relieve some of those concerns, provide some of that education as we move forward, I think that might help mitigate some of our concerns.
So given that this is very technical, would it be beneficial, and I might ask if it would be okay if we ask the applicant, I guess in this case, to come in and maybe answer some of those more technical questions?
I think this body would be fine with that. The only thing that we would want to make very clear to the applicant ahead of time is that it's not a sales pitch.
Sure.
It's educating us on what the application request actually is.
Yeah, what's my next question would be, well, what's the plan if you only have a couple hundred current customers?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a city of 50-something thousand that's growing every single day. What's the plan? Is it just that he wants to get access to provide it to a little pocket, and we're granting a blanket
In discussions with
15-year,
him,
basically 15-year deal for the whole city, and he's just isn't capable, doesn't have the capital to provide services for everyone,
yeah.
right?
The discussions with him, his first step is to reach up into the cove because he's there already. And then I don't know if his plans are to grow beyond that. I imagine.
I mean, I'm
as
not
as
against a
business
small
you
company
would.
trying to grow and become
Yeah.
big, but,
I don't
but
know
this is
either.
more of a utility thing that we do have a responsibility to make sure that people can get served.
So, yeah, if we can get that kind of education and additional information, I think that would help move this conversation along for this body.
I agree.
Like, I think you need to go to Gordon and figure out if it's a block or a tranche that he's buying.
There's got to be a special word for that.
I know.
I'll have to figure out what that is.
And as we're doing that, one thing that I'll probably need from staff is I'm almost positive we literally have conduit in the ground, that we have, I think, 4 spaces, and we've already sold or given access to 1 or 2 of them. I'd like some updated information regarding those and those easements. I think it's down 100.
Existing conduit, when we looked at the cove, that's how this whole discussion started. The developer of the cove has been doing stuff since 2004. And apparently there was a conversation between Mr. Murdoch and the developer that there were some conduits put in back in the day. And I looked in all of our GIS, all of our data. I can't find them anywhere. So they were never recorded by us. And if they were, I don't know if they're private or public. There's no engineering plan or plat or anything that shows that these conduits are in the ground. But Chase did talk a little bit about a duct swap agreement. And so we've worked on those before with, I think, Syringa, where if they come in and put 4 conduits in the ground, then they're usually 1.5-inch diameter conduits. They'll run their fiber in 1 or 2 of them, and then they'll give the other 2 to the
That
city.
may be very specifically the thing I'm vaguely remembering from 6 or 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
So if we could look into that and help me make sure that I'm tracking appropriately so that I know I'm making a smart decision.
Okay, well, we'll get that information for you. Thank you.
Is this something to be brought back on the work? Okay, work meeting.
Yes, please, for the work meeting. Thank you. Any other further discussions on this at this time? All right, we will move on to 2.5. Bonneville study update. Wendy.
First, I would just like to acknowledge Jackie's meeting management skills. We are like tracking right on schedule
This is
here.
beautiful.
So
Well,
good job, Jackie.
We're going to do this, Jackie. I got you.
7:59, that's.
All right, so in your packet, you'll see some information on a proposal from Bonneville Research for an update to the Olympia Hills study, as well as the original documents that they provided in 2018. Staff reached out to them. They did provide us a cost of $21,900 to update the report with the new numbers based on what the county has approved for the Olympia Hills development. They believe it'll take them about 30 days to complete the report. So you have a couple of options here. They're outlined in your packet. Either just wait until it becomes more imminent and see if the numbers change and maybe update it then. Do nothing, go ahead and update it now with the understanding that those units, the density might change in the future, or go for it and let's do it. So we're here to listen to you debate.
Do it.
And according to your report, again, of the cost of the proposed cost of $21,900, really, we only need to come up with an additional $3,900.
Yes, there was some money returned from Wasatch Front Regional Council last year that we were able to put towards this. We still would need to come back and amend the budget to put that full amount in, or we could wait till July 1st and just include it in next fiscal year's budget. So it's really up to the council as to what they want to do and how they want to move forward on this.
Jared, what was your comment?
Said go for it. Just do it.
Yeah, I feel like I already decided this a long time ago that we wanted to do this, and I haven't changed my mind.
Okay.
So, Steve, any thoughts?
I went back and read the Bonneville Research original report. And I think there's some things that it was really good about telling us, but there's also some things that it didn't tell us. What I personally have curiosity about is data and information that would help us quantify what is what is that number between 2.9 and 9.8 that is, for lack of a better term right now, we'll call it a manageable number. That it told us 2.95 we could do, and it told us 9.9 we couldn't, but it didn't tell us where there's a break-even number in between there.
Well, there wasn't a break even, if I recall, both reading through that and looking at my notes from his presentation. It was the 2.9 was what we could provide the current level of services we're providing. That's what we could afford to provide, that level of service for that area. If we went above that density, then we would have to pull back on services provided.
I'm not sure that that's substantiated by the report that we got. I mean, that might be your interpretation of it, but I just didn't see that in the data. As a matter of fact, there was a whole series of times we're talking about 3 or 4 different sets of numbers regarding what could happen in Olympia Hills, and all of those were within our general plans and possibly acceptable numbers. What I would like to understand better, and I don't know if the Bonneville study is the path forward for that, if there's another path we have to do, but Alan took some numbers that are presented by the developers, kind of high-level plans right now, and backed into a financial analysis and forecasted a big financial gap. What I don't know is there a number at which, and again, this is really generalized because there's differences whether it's clustered high density or it's single family, spread out over a bunch of acres, all impacts the answer to these questions, but is there some number that actually can be sustainable for our city? And what is that number? In the absence of that, we're all just kind of guessing, right? And if there is an impetus or a need or a discussion to be had about the fiscal impacts of annexing Olympia Hills, we should understand, at least have a basis of where's the number we need to be working towards as a city to be fiscally responsible. And having a number that we can use, for lack of a better term, in negotiations or in discussions with the developer to explain, this is a number that is sustainable inside of our fiscal constraints as a city to where we could consider doing this. Anything above that becomes damaging to our quality of life, our undermines our ability to provide services, so forth. And so whatever that number is, that's what I'd like to better understand, because I think that the first report failed to really identify that number.
Well, and I think what they've outlined in their proposal here is gray area, right? Is that I don't think we're going to get a number to go on. We're going to get, the first question is, we'll define what quality of life means to Harriman residents, right? That's a whole lot of ambiguous stuff involved there, not just hard numbers. And as I pointed out before, it's not just the city, right? I get property taxes. Look at your property tax, very little goes to the city, right? It's other agencies, it's schools, and all those other things that are impacted by all this stuff. So I think it's going to be a mix of numbers and some of those non-quantifiable things that are somewhat intangible. But that's what we're tasked to do, is what's that range where we think it fits the number and the idea of what that quality of life is, right? So the example was used of having more people and more sales tax dollars based on population is good in comparison to fewer roads. The numbers look better, but the quality of life is terrible. That's the opposite of the problem we're trying to solve with transportation and more roads, right? So I think they've outlined that smartly in their proposal, right? They haven't nailed down a number, but I totally agree with you, is we need something to work with that way. Like where's the level where we know it's not workable? where's the ideal and what does it mean in between? How can,
Well, and there's another aspect about that has to change from the original report, is that the original report was based on a yet undetermined hypothetical. Now, this isn't a hypothetical. Olympia Hills is coming. It's going to be developed. There are going to be some number of houses built out there. There are going to be more people using roads that are going to feed into Harriman City. There is a real
why we wanna
impact
do
coming,
this.
and we don't know whether that's in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years or 30 years or when and how that's all going to play out. That's all hypothetical. But eventually there's an impact. And so the shift has to be a little bit more from, okay, in an ideal world, this is what we'd love to have. And then there is, well, this is coming on your doorstep, and these are the areas that are where your infrastructure is going to fail, and this is how you have to deal with it. And having some kind of an analysis around that has got to be what this
I think
body
that,
is asking.
but that question that you stated is different from the one you first stated, right? The first question was, what number would it make sense for it to come into the city? And the last statement was, this is coming regardless, what's the impact on us, right? As it is. So we need that range. I agree with you. We need that analysis. That's why we need to do this, update it, and massage it a little bit to what is that range of quality of life that we think we can provide, right? And there is a quantifiable number aspect to it, but then there's an unquantifiable, that quality of life feel to it. So we just need something to base our decisions on, right? We need some more information,
Right.
somebody to evaluate those things.
And here's there's 2 points about this that are causing me some cognitive dissonance. Let's just call it that, okay? The one thing is that based on what's currently approved at 6.6 units per acre with so many single family and high density and multifamily, the development agreement lays out certain areas and certain number of units and those things. If that were to happen, there's an impact on our city. There's just no argument there. The question is, how are we going to manage that impact? Are we going to do it through annexation, or are we going to do it through some other means? Are we going to do it,
I don't think
good
that's-
neighbors? We're going to do it as oppositional neighbors. That's a question.
Those are questions we got to answer, but
Right.
that's not what Bonneville will do for us, right?
That's kind of my point, is that I'm not so sure that moving forward with this report is going to be that helpful.
I think it will be, because we need them to evaluate what has been approved and what that effect on our city will be based on their analysis of the current proposal, so that we have something to go by and say, geez, if they get everything that they want that's been promised, we know there's a lot of things that aren't nailed down in their plan. It's not a complete plan, right? There's a lot of, again, gray area in what's been approved by the county. But we need to have, if I'm doing this analysis and by reading kind of their proposal and what they've done before, that's the starting point, right? We want them to say, look, if this happens the way we all think it's going to happen based on what's proposed, this is the likely effect on your city in these categories, right? And then we can take that and say, well, does that make sense to take on as a city an annexation? And if it does, here's the suggestions on things that maybe you try to get concessions on, right? Or we know that in those annexation discussions, it's going to be, well, if you want us to come in the city, what are you going to give us, right? What can we afford to do or not do? And then that gives us a starting point. But without that, to your point, we're guessing and doing basically future forecasting based on assumptions.
Right.
So we need a starting point of this is the effect it will have as it stands with our current understanding, and that will give us different directions to go from.
Well, the second part of what I was getting to that I think ties into this is that there's a potential irony in that our efforts to reduce density has largely been focused on quality of life, on number of people on the roads, of congestion, of, just on and on and on, all the things that we might put into quality of life. There's an aspect of this is whether or not that quality of life is affordable and sustainable. And I think there's a point it's almost like a bell curve or an S-curve here, where there's a point at which it's sustainable and doable, and it gets to a point to where it's not sustainable and doable, but if you keep going up, there's a place where it starts to become sustainable and developable again, based on some of the things that Alan was talking about, population driving sales tax revenues and all these kinds of things. It was really hard for me to accept the fact that an answer might be related to a higher density number, might make it affordable, where a lower density number might not make it affordable. And that's kind of where I'm hoping that this research, whether it's Bonneville or another option, helps us bridge that gap of information. Where are our sweet spots? Where are the places where that works and it doesn't work? Where are the places where it's going to cause breakdown, and where's the place that allows us to be successful?
Right, exactly. I guess at least the conversations that we've had previously, what I've been involved with the Southwest mayors and the visioning study, is not around density, right? And I know everybody here has heard me say this a million times, and I've said it to Kennecott, Olympia Hills, and everybody else. The density to me doesn't matter, right? Density in and of itself is not a problem. Right. Density without supporting infrastructure is a huge problem and degrades quality of life. So I've told Olympia Hills, Doug, and whoever, build 100 units per acre if you want to, as long as it has a supporting infrastructure, right? That's to me what it enables quality of life. So can we afford to provide the supporting infrastructure, right, for that quality of life to be sustainable? That's the ultimate question, and it's not just what the city provides, it's all those other things as well. So I think it's more than valuable to analyze that part and give us something to go on if and when these conversations, come up.
I always think knowledge is power, and every piece of data that we can get that gives us more knowledge, if we're going to go into any kind of negotiations, the more knowledge we have, the better position we are at a negotiation table.
Sure. And
so I think it gives us more knowledge, and I'm good with Bob and Bonneville. I think that they're going to do a good job at this, and I don't think that they're going to bring back all the answers, because at the end of the day, the answers lie here. The answers lie with our decision of how we represent our citizens, because we'll have to make those decisions. They're not going to tell us what to do. We're going to have to analyze the data, analyze Alan's data, analyze this data, and any other piece of information we can get, and move forward with the decision.
There's a couple key starting points when you want to look at numbers of this, right? The problem with density and infrastructure is that the city has general plans, the county has a general plan, right? Other cities have general plans, and we have to provide them to the county and so forth up the line. And we build our other plans around them, right? Roads and transportation, master transportation and parks plan, all that kind of stuff around that general plan. But what's happened, not just us, but our surrounding cities, and at least with the Southwest, as we've discussed this with legislators and other developers and decision makers, is that we've made big mistakes in the Southwest, right? And other cities have too, in that we have awarded higher density than what we have planned for in our general plans, et cetera, right? Which is why I always push back on people and say, well, if you're asking for more than what we've planned for, right, you have to justify it, and how do we fix the rest of those plans to provide the infrastructure for that higher density? And the issue with Olympia Hills is that the planned for density out there at the highest, with all of the supporting infrastructure, with all if you read the county's general plan, and all of those supporting plans would have to be upgraded to get to 5. That's what's been planned for.
I mean, our general plan only was accounting for maybe up to 3.5.
Well, and I say that's the maximum if they upgrade all the other infrastructure plans, which have not been done in awarding a higher number than the 3 that is in their general plan, right? And so those are the starting points, and that's the problem with this, is that what's been awarded and what they're wanting is much higher than what we've planned for, than what the county's planned for, et cetera. And hopefully, as the state tries to, as we work together with our surrounding cities and legislators, as we just saw this session, that's what needs to get fixed. If we need more density, then we need more density, but you have to provide the infrastructure.
Right.
Without the infrastructure, that's where quality of life goes away, and that's what people are upset with.
Well, and I think that, let me be clear. I'm all for getting all the data we can. I am not opposed to not move, I'm not saying we shouldn't move forward with this at all. What I'm saying is that if we move forward and we don't get usable information, we don't get real data that's helping us fill in our information gaps and solve problems, and I don't know that it's worth spending the money. So I want to make sure that we're at least articulating what some of these questions are. Maybe, Bob, listening to our conversation, might have some ideas of where to tweak this or something like that, or staff might have some recommendations where to tweak this. But right now, in an ideal world, the plans are all going to support 3.5 units an acre. They're not designed to support 6 or 7 units an acre.
Right.
So if it comes in at 6 units an acre, 6.6 units an acre, or 5.5, whatever that number is, we are going to have failing infrastructure. It just won't. None of the plans are going to support that. So the question is,
why wouldn't we do
That's
this
what I
study?
want the plan, that's what I want the study to
because
address.
no, the problem is we can't stop it.
Well, right, so my point is that,
We need to know what we would have to do.
yes.
Right.
And that's not saying we need to know that to annex it into the city. That's not up to us. They get to decide that. But we need to know what we need to go work with our partners and the county and the state to get funds to upgrade the infrastructure because everything's downstream.
Right.
Right.
So
I would say that,
That's a good point.
obviously, the development is approved at what it is right now. That, from the first study that was done to now, that is a major change in what was there. What I would like to see, and I think we just need to be very specific with Bonneville, should we choose to move it forward, is the answers to those questions that we want to see. And that is, I think what you're saying, Stephen, that is this is what's approved. If, in fact, they do choose to annex into our city, what impacts now is that development going to have on our existing infrastructure? Where are our failings, and what is it going to take to upgrade those so that we can go have those conversations?
what's our responsibility, what's not? Because part of their plan is the wording that Olympia Hills has to pay their fair share of those upgrades.
Right.
No matter what.
Right. And so, I think that there was some information that was not what we were looking for in the first one, but I think that there was a lot of assumptions that had to be made in that
Yeah,
first
so we
one.
just didn't know.
And to find another firm at this point that has the background and the information already there, I think certainly it would delay that process and become much more expensive for us to try and get some more of this additional information. Again, I think we just need to be specific with them of what we want this to accomplish. And again, if we can get those assurities that they understand what that is and how they're going to look at that based on the approved plan that exists out there today, I would be in favor of moving forward.
I agree, Steve. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I don't want them to do the same thing they did, just with new numbers, right? No, we're looking for more because now there's an actual plan.
Yep.
I'll call it plan. That's been
There's an
approved.
approval, let's just call it that.
I mean,
There are some things that are known now that were not before that they were using assumptions.
So right, and that's the thing that in the presentation that was made to us, we have a capital improvement plan for certain roads that we needed to install, and the impact of Olympia Hills is going to force us to move some of those up sooner and move some of these things forward. But what I'm not even sure that our capital projects plan for certain intersections is sufficient at 6.6 units an acre, or if our capital projects plan is only to accommodate 3.5 or 4 units an acre. And so there's such a disconnect between what has been historic plans and now, a train wreck shift, and we have to plan for something totally
Right, but there's a process that we would have
figure out how to do that?
There's a process we would have to go through to update all those plans should that be annexed.
Right.
And that's part of the process to go through.
Yeah.
Of course it doesn't today, because we've never planned on that. But should that request come in for an annexation, that would trigger, again, updates to all of those plans to now factor that in.
Yeah, and we need to identify what our responsibilities would be if it were in our city and what our responsibilities would be if it weren't.
So
I mean,
what,
there's a big,
what I'm
there's
hearing,
a big difference.
what
there,
I'm
too.
hearing as direction to staff is that we would like staff to make sure and provide to us what exactly the specific goal of the updated study would be, and in the best way that you guys know how, try to accommodate both of these sides of view. Where are we going with what we have? What can we do? And see where we can do to bring that into a successful study so that we can be informed when we need to make a decision moving forward regarding any potential annexation or simply what the impacts on our study be if there is not an annexation.
Agreed.
Does the council disagree with me in regards to that direction?
I think it's good. And to be fair, there are some sections of their proposal, like section 3 specifically talks about, impact on transportation and using different plans. And I think that's all going to be beneficial. I think Jared said it really well. We just don't want a redo of what was done before.
We do not.
We need it to be a little different this time.
Okay, I will talk to Mr. Springmeyer tomorrow and find out if they can accomplish those tasks that we talked about tonight and then get back with you. Does that sound good?
Do you feel like you have the direction you need?
Yes.
Okay.
Full disclosure, I had actually reached out to Bob, last week to see if I could talk to him this week, and he was able to, and my schedule got blown up because I wanted to ask him kind of those questions. If we're talking about how this is supposed to come to you already, but if it does, can we look at this in a different way? We want more detail, et cetera. So
Awesome.
I had intended to talk to him about that on my own, but wasn't able to.
All right.
Would you like that to be in an upcoming work meeting where you can have those conversations with Bonneville directly?
Not yet.
I think if you've got the direction, have the discussion.
If staff feels that they need additional direction, we'd ask them to come to us for that direction, but I don't think we need to speak to them
I'd
directly.
rather get it moving.
Exactly. I agree. Okay, we're going to move on to item 3.1, budget report discussion.
We go and ask those
Alan,
questions.
I'm trying to move us along. I want to know if Jackie's still on track. We're doing so good. That's what I thought.
So as we're getting ready to do the, the budget, one of our first things is looking at what our revenue projections are for the.
Can we see this on our screen, please? Thank you.
For not only the coming year, but also how we're ending up with for this year. So I want to take a look at our major revenues, where we're at, how they're progressing, what we think we're going to see. First of all, our property tax. And I know I got just numbers. I don't have many words. I don't have any pictures. So we're just going to be looking at numbers here.
You have some flooring down there at the bottom. It's good.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know where that came from. Okay. We budgeted this year in our general fund to collect $830,000 in property taxes. It looks to me like we're going to end at around 890, so we're up a little bit, projecting 913 for the coming year. So even though that's a pretty small and insignificant item, it is increasing at a fairly good rate. Our next property taxes are our CDA, which represent the area surrounding City Hall here. We are going to end this year slightly lower than what we projected, but still adequate for our requirement. We have two bonds on this CDA that total about $1,800,000 a year in payments. So we're going to have roughly $1 million extra here. The money at this point is just sitting in that CDA account till we verify and confirm costs and what we will have to reimburse. So our next one, the Business Center Cda, this is the one down by the soccer stadium. I expect that we're going to actually finish this year with 1.6 million instead of the 950,000 that we projected. with the CDA money comes in twice a year, and typically we get about 80% of it in December and the balance in March. So we should be getting our final payment of this amount in the next week or so, but I suspect that'll be significantly higher than what we had originally projected. Again, there's no budget to spend any of this until such time that we get documented costs. Anthem, we're growing a little bit faster there than we thought. Now this is, we do have the documented costs on the Anthem already to the point that they've developed, and so there is some money that could be distributed there as we receive our final payment this week on that. So we expect to actually finish this year with $905,000 of money in that CDA. Then we've got our Harriman Safety Enforcement, our police. I believe we're going to end this year with about $200,000 more than what we projected in property taxes for Harriman City Safety Enforcement, and going to $7.1 million next year. This last one, Harriman City Fire Service area, you'll see there that I'm projecting for 2022 that we'll collect $5,900,000. Keep in mind that our UFA contract is $4.1 million, plus we have a $300,000 bond. So our total costs through UFA this year is going to be about $4.5 million. So this is showing us with about $1.4 million, $1.5 million excess on our fire service in the coming year.
Alan, just really quick, I just want to make a comment before we move on from it, and I don't want to derail it. I just want to put it as something that we can come back to at another time.
Okay.
And that is on both of our safety enforcement area services, when we broke away from those two existing organizations to bring that in-house, we just brought with it the existing mill levy that was set from those organizations.
Right.
What I would like to be able to understand is now those were set on much larger organizations than we just have now covering in Harriman. What I would like to understand, I guess, is the history of how they got to where they set that mill levy, and then an understanding of, is that still the correct mill levy to have for us here for our current needs and what our projected needs are moving forward. But again, we've just kind of brought those over, accepting what was in place there, but now I think it's appropriate for us, since they are here, to take that little bit deeper dive into what does that need to change.
Yeah. Well, I think it actually, and I agree with you, that's a discussion that needs to be had, but it needs to be kind of the other way around. We figure out what we need, and from that, we determine what the mill levy is.
Yep.
But, right now, with, say, the fire one, it's going to be adequate to do some replacement of fire stations that, I don't know what the future holds for how we want to do our fire service, but, there's going to be some additional money for that.
Okay.
So that's a discussion to be had. Next is, if we look at our sales tax, this is where we're really seeing changes in our revenue at this point. Our sales tax, there's a lot of talk about how much change sales tax is having because of online shopping and so forth, but ours began to really show a lot of change long before the pandemic. In the 2019 year, we increased by 24.5%. For the year, we are currently sitting about 33% increase in the current year. We did see Amazon come on and start paying taxes to the state roughly 2 years ago. That's continued to grow and to the point that some months they are our biggest sales taxpayer, but we are on track to go around 30% increase this year in sales tax. We're seeing a similar increase in our county option tax. So my projection is that we'll finish this year at $6.3 million in general sales tax, with 7.9 next year. And that's still not projecting next year to the full 30%. It's only 20%. But, you know, we've been hesitant to increase the sales tax projections to follow the trend because we're afraid the trend isn't going to last. But now we're into our 5th year of those same kind of increases. We're starting to increase the amount of projections we're using. This is just a
Question before you move on from that. Does that projection for 2022 include any projected changes due to the census?
What?
Any projected changes due to the census?
No, this is projected based on where we're at right now.
So if the census indicates that we have a higher population than what the state says now, that would go up from there?
It would go up from there, yeah. We will get a natural increase in June. Every year we get a June increase. I don't know that the census will be available by then, but we will have an increase in June, just what we get every year. So that's just a graphical representation of what we've seen with our sales tax over the last few years. The orange is what happens from our local point of sale. The blue is the population base. But you can see what kind of a change we've seen over the last several years in the way that it's growing, and it's kind of hard to project what it's doing right now. We're seeing some growth in our franchise tax. It's not a great deal of growth. We're seeing similar to what we're seeing in our property taxes. In everything except our telephone. You can see our telephone's going down.
Is that landline? Is that
Yeah.
why? Yeah.
Okay, so we're seeing that go down consistently, and you know, again, how far is it going to go down? You know, we were talking in the office yesterday about how little some of us actually use our desk phone anymore, and you know, so, but you know, that's going down. But we're seeing our energy tax, which is gas and electric, going up. We're seeing our cable going up. We have, I haven't put it in the slides here, but we've actually started collecting now some transient room tax for temporary rentals, like Airbnb kind of things. It's not a big deal yet, but we're going to hit somewhere around $6,000 to $8,000 in revenue from those types of things this year. So it's just started coming to us. So, but you'll see there's just a slight increase in both energy and cable. And our energy taxes actually follow very closely what our property tax does. It's almost identical percentages as we do that. Now, if you look at our building permits, I projected that we would collect $4.3 million in building permits this year. It looks like we're going to finish the year at 2.8. We're down. This is the area that we've lost revenue this year. But we have collected in sales tax an amount similar to what we're losing here. They talked to our building department. I talked to Blake. They say there's a lot of things in the pipeline that could change this in the next year, but I don't think we're ready to actually change projections at this point, that we need to see it happen a little bit before we head that direction. But so we've made some adjustments down in building permits to complete this year and going into next year. You'll see, you know, we've actually been on a little bit of a downward trend in building permits for 3 years now. So it's coming down, and so we're looking at our projections staying in that same range for at least now. Our engineering and inspections are a similar type of thing. There's a slight increase in them, but we're not seeing much growth here. We're a little bit higher in our projections for this year than we started with our budget, and we expect them to go a little bit next year, but we don't see much change here. Our BNC road funds are actually seeing some pretty good increase right now. And BNC road funds, at least for us, is totally a population-based projection revenue. It's not that way across the whole state, but because of the way we get ours, it's basically a population because we don't have any state roads. So we're seeing some pretty good increase here. Now, just keep in mind that this road funds and the county option road funds, we have to show in our accounting that that's being used for our road maintenance, okay? So, and we do that, you know, because it's not just paying for like a slurry seal, it's for paying for our entire road department and how they function. Our park fee, this again is following pretty closely to what we're seeing as increases in our property taxes. You'll see we're going to be a little higher in our current year than we projected. We also project that to go a little bit higher next year. But it is, again, representing the same flow that we're seeing in our property taxes and our franchise taxes. And lastly, again, just like our building permits, we've had to roll back our impact fees to some degree because we're not hitting the impact fees when we're not doing the building permits. So you'll see that, you know, park, which is our largest impact fee, is seeing the biggest change. However, stormwater isn't based on building permits, it's based on subdivisions. So it's hard to judge that one because you have to, you know, it comes in when a subdivision comes in rather than as individual lots. But you see that particularly water and park are seeing a reduction this year from what I originally projected in our budget. Overall, I believe that our revenue is going to be just about what we started this year with, so we're not going to see much increase or decrease in our overall revenue for the city this year than what we had last year. If you have any questions, see if I can answer them.
Any questions, concerns, discussion? Nope. All right, thank you, Alan. We appreciate it. With that, we will move on to item 4.1, or item 4. Item 4.1 of which is street names, change process, engineering. Yeah, Blake. They just threw you under the bus there. They're just like engineering.
So we're taking a little bit different approach to this, just so the council is aware. This was a memo that was submitted to you by our engineering department in response to questions that were asked about street name change.
Yes.
We just wanted that memo to be part of the record, and so that's why we added it to the council agenda. It's more of if you have more questions. Blake really didn't prepare a presentation, but he's happy to talk to you all about street name changes if you'd like to hear about it.
I like the process that's outlined there in terms of some of the questions that have been asked recently, and understanding the process myself of how streets are given names and when it's required for them to be changed and those types of things. So I appreciate the information, and I appreciate the fact that we have now, I guess, maybe a little bit better process outlined of how that happens, and that our residents can be informed of how that happens, and if there's a desire to do it, what they need to do in order to make that happen. So I don't have any questions, but I appreciate the work on it.
You know, I agree. Just generally wondering, looking for comments maybe from Chase about whether or not this SOP is just fine or whether we need to codify this in ordinance moving forward to make sure this is taken care of properly.
With regard to having a memo included as the record, or sorry, what's your the street name process?
Right.
Well, it's largely established by the county, right?
Yeah, so the county does have an ordinance for it, so we kind of followed their ordinance, but if we haven't really ran into too many issues, just a couple here or there, if we start running into them, I'd probably recommend we do an ordinance on it.
Just, I appreciate this layout. This is an adoption of somebody else's stuff, and I just need to know whether or not we should make it our own stuff, so.
I'll look into that. I don't think that we need to, but we may, in looking at that, and like Blake said, if there's a high volume of these, it may be worth doing that.
Okay.
Really quickly to follow up on this, though, there was one issue that brought this whole thing to light, and the process we followed with that resident, or that group of residents, wasn't exactly how this memo laid out as we started working through it. So we're reaching out to that group of residents and working with them to follow this process now to correct our past errors on that one.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, with that, I will accept a motion to adjourn our city council work meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Do we need a recess, or do we want to go straight in so we can get out of here?
Keep chugging.
Go.
Okay, all right, we
Good luck,
will
Jackie.
move straight on to our general meeting. We will start our general meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, which will be led by Tammy Moody.
I don't think she knew that, but.
She did not.
Please repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We appreciate your participation in our meeting, Tammy. Thank you very much. Item 6.2, any city council comments and recognitions?
I have one very quick one. Many are aware that we've been working through a process to try and identify and hire a new city manager. That has required a lot of extra work on the part of some of our staff in order to facilitate meetings and notes and all of those things. I just want to say thank you to the staff for doing that. All you have to do is look down at the consent agenda and the number of meeting minutes that need to be approved tonight, and you will see that we've been busy doing stuff, but that means staff's been very busy too. So thank you to staff.
One quick comment if I can too. A couple weeks ago, we had a memorial for commemorating the 1-year anniversary since Hondo's passing. And without getting too weepy-eyed about this, because it was a very emotional proceeding, but I just can never say it often enough or with enough sincerity to just thank our officers for all that they do every day. Thank you.
I would also like to just quickly recognize staff for the efforts they put in regards to everything that we've dealt with over the last year in regards to compliance with state mandates and county mandates and mask mandates and every other kind of mandate that we could be given. I appreciate the staff for helping us facilitate meetings and providing us with these wonderful fight barricades so that we don't,
Closures.
we stay on our own side. But I'm extremely grateful. And I'm grateful for the efforts I'm sure they're going to put in very soon to help understand what the state changes is going to mean for us, as we've already talked about, and helping our public understand what that is. And so, once again, we expect a lot of our staff, and they always rise to the challenge, and we appreciate those efforts. If there's no further comments, we will move on to item 7, which is public comments. Audience members may bring in any item to the city council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comments for this minute will also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the commission or the body may submit a comment by emailing recorder@harriman.org or by visiting harriman.org/agenda and minutes, where there is a link to fill out the online public comment form. Your statement will be then read into the public record. With that, we will start by opening it up to those currently present. If there's any member of the audience that would like to make public comment at this time, please come up to the podium and state your name and begin your comment.
Hello, good evening. Can you hear me?
Just one moment, please.
My name is Dustin Grimness. I represent Legacy Towing, SKG Management. I noticed that 10 discussion and action items, 10.1, Chase Andreezy, he's here. Great. Nice to meet you. Is this now appropriate time?
Yes.
Okay. So my business partner and I, Schaefer McGanna, who's in the back, have worked over the last 5 years with Representative Malloy and a number of different towing amendments to try and bring together universal signage for the state of Utah. And we recognize that in this forum here, the desire is to discuss, a lot of these issues that are happening as these cities are growing. We're here tonight to try and be a part of that solution. We've had a conversation with Chase, and we think that it'd be a great opportunity to work together because there are some things that the state has done in the last 2 years that are actually really moving forward to make this better. So that's what we would like to, go on record is we think there's over the next even couple of weeks, we could provide tremendous value in helping, the city of Harriman to have, something that's a little bit more concrete in this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the audience here in physical presence that would like to speak at this time? All right, seeing none, I'm going to turn to our city recorder for any digital. We do also have one member digitally I believe I have Kenneth Ridge on the line with Representative Owen's office. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
There you are. We can see you. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to take the time outside of our busy schedule and introduce myself. My name is Kenneth Ridge, and I work for Congressman Owens out of Utah's 4th Congressional District, and Harriman City falls within our district. I just wanted to take the time to let you guys know about our services offered. We help constituents in our district with help across the several federal agencies. Myself, I'm a constituent service representative, also a Navy veteran of 9 years. So under my purview of my casework, I handle a lot of veteran military affairs. I also deal with IRS, but we have caseworkers in the office that handle a whole range of issues and ranging from, again, veteran military affairs to USCIS passport cases. And so I just wanted to take the time and see if there's any questions maybe that our office can answer, or anything that Congressman can do that you guys want brought on a federal level, as well as take the opportunity to let you guys know that we thank you for everything that your city does for our district.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Any questions from our body on with the individual from the representative's office? Mr. Ridge, we appreciate you coming, and we always appreciate the efforts of our congressional representatives. We have worked with many in the past that have been helpful, and we look forward to continuing those relationships with our congressional representatives. As we have residents that come to us that we believe can be benefited by your office, we will absolutely pass them along. So thank you very much for introducing yourself.
Thank you, and you guys have a great evening.
You too, sir. Thank you very much. Do I have any other digital comments or to be written in? Okay. With that, I will close the public meeting or public comment portion of our meeting. With that, we'll go on to item 8, which is City Council Board and Committee reports.
I had Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District Board meeting today. We're moving through our finance portion of our just preparing for budget and things like that. So we'll continue to have additional meetings for that. We're still, obviously, we got some good snow the other day, and a lot of people are excited about that, including the water district, but it brought our totals up about 3%. So not a lot. We went from about 53 to 57% on the Beaver Divide. So we're still really, really dry. It's anticipated our runoff this year will be at about 50%. So keep hoping for snow and praying for snow. And and do what you can to conserve water. My report.
Just real quick, we had the 2021 virtual AMCA annual meeting for the mosquito abatement district, and it was here in Utah. It was supposed to be hosted, so a lot of the presentations had to do with Utah and our history. But there was a section of about 6 presentations over an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, that dealt primarily with the history of mosquito abatement in Utah and Utah's role in developing mosquito abatement across the country. And despite my skepticism about the conference, I was blown away. Those were amazing presentations. The quality of information, the detail was just unbelievable. And it was surprising to just see how prominent a role Utah has played in the history of developing responsible, effective means of abating mosquitoes and the diseases that they carry. It's fantastic. So proud of Utah, proud of all we're doing there. Second thing is, Associated Municipal Councils met yesterday. We had a presentation from Dan Hemmert from the Governor's Office of Economic Development. And it was, they have some changes coming. They have a new name. They're creating a new commission based on some legislation that just passed. They have a broader scope of things they're going to be working on. Essentially trying to, as we talked about earlier, kind of coordinating things like economic development, transportation, infrastructure, affordable housing, like realizing these are all kind of synergistic issues rather than separate siloed issues. I think it would behoove us to reach out to their office, maybe have Dan come give a presentation to us. We may want to adjust the timing of that based on if and when we bring on a new city manager to have them a part of that discussion. But I definitely think we need to put that on a future agenda to have him come out. It was really, really good stuff.
Real quick, we had the Conference of Mayors meeting just almost 2 weeks ago now. We spent the bulk of the time because the legislative session was still in progress at that time on legislation and what was happening over the last, anticipated to happen over the last week plus of the session. And then we also had a presentation from David Schold from the County Health Department, again, updating us in terms of numbers and the inoculation process. I think we're all excited to see that continuing to move forward quickly. And if you saw today's update, the plan is to open, or at least the desire and plan is to open up by April 1st, those vaccines available to everybody. So I think we're moving in a great direction, and obviously we're seeing the numbers continuing to trend in a positive direction. For the county and the state as a whole. And then the last thing, we're what used to be part of COM and we've gotten away from over the past year just because of other restrictions of COVID, is having a city, at least usually they have a city host and then kind of spotlight themselves. At least we're getting back to where cities are gonna at least be highlighting the things going on in their communities. And I guess as we get later in the year, even the possibility of cities back to hosting those. Much to Wendy's dismay, we ended up with June. She was trying to text me feverishly saying, not June, not June, not June. And by the time I got there, it was only June that was left. So. So we are scheduled in June. Again, there may be a slight glimmer of hope that we may even be able to host it here. And obviously, if we do end up hosting it here, I think it'd be a great opportunity to have, all members of the council, if they're available, to be able to come and participate and even participate in the highlighting our city and the great things that we're doing out here. So that's it for COM.
So real quick, just from Southwest Mayor's Visioning Study, I mentioned that next visioning meeting is going to be in a week or so, and it'll be interesting now with the transportation bills have been passed. We'll change that discussion a little bit, but just have to make mention of how useful this has been this last couple of years. This year especially, I think we saw it really pay off, especially that last week with the transportation bills. I had numerous legislators comment to me as we were making calls that weekend. I was on the road for my kid in Arizona playing soccer and was working the phones nonstop to the point that he asked me on the way home, when are you going to stop talking on the phone? But several of them mentioned several times of how useful it's been that the mayors of our 6 cities basically, and I have to give credit to Mayor Staggs in Riverton. It was his brainchild, and he really has run it and brought people together and continues to drive it. But we've brought all of our legislators together, and they've mentioned several times how good it's been for them to work as a block, not just for kind of our local issues, but on the other issues that they're dealing with up there. But it's kind of unprecedented. Who would imagine that it would have taken this long for people to actually work together instead of trying to just carve out their little piece, right? But it's really changed the game up there, and we're at least, I think, going to start to see the fruits of those labors coming up. So.
Okay, we will move on to our consent agenda. I'll accept a motion.
Motion to approve the consent agenda as written.
I will second.
I have a motion from Steve, a second from Clint. Jared?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And I will vote yes. That motion passes. We will move on to our one item for tonight's meeting, discussion and consideration of an ordinance approving an amendment to Title VI of the Harriman City Code and adopting a fee schedule for violations of Title VI. Chase.
Thank you, Mayor. So this item, just by way of procedural history, you've had twice on your agenda, once February 10th at a work meeting, and then again at another work meeting on February 24th. The version that you see before you tonight is exactly the same as what was presented on the 24th, so there are no changes in this particular version. As requested by the council, I did send out a letter to all of the HOA management companies within the city, informing them of these changes, specifically with regard to the towing ordinances. I did not hear back from any of them when my staff report was drafted, but I did hear back from them within the last few days. Specifically, 2 HOA management companies did reach out to me, one with just a few questions that I was able to answer, another one just today, about an hour before the meeting began, asking to engage in a larger discussion with me about some of these items with regard to towing. Largely positive, right? Wanted to dive into the conversation a little bit more. And then, as you heard tonight from Mr. Grimness, one towing company also reached out, and I've had a conversation with them and their attorney about some of these changes with regard to the towing ordinance and how that affects private HOAs. Given those conversations that I've had and the kind of recent changes that may come up from those conversations, I would change my recommendation from what was included in the staff report to maybe continue this item to allow staff and myself to engage in those conversations with these individuals. I think it's important to have these important players as part of the conversation. And I'm not positive it's going to change anything. In fact, I think we may come out with the same result, and hopefully it will just be better and more smooth, not only for the city and from an enforcement perspective, but also for HOAs and towing companies who are going to be involved. So that would be my recommendation. I don't know if there's any additional discussion items that the council wants to talk about with that. Again, it's the same version that you reviewed on the 24th of February, so there are no substantive changes to the actual code.
I turn to council at this point. Is there any objection to tabling this item for 2 weeks?
No, I would move we table it until such time as Chase is ready to bring it back.
Yeah, getting conversation going will help everybody.
So I think the reason I, in the first place, requested to have the HOAs contacted was exactly that, so we would get that participation. I'm happy to see that we have a business in the area that wants to participate as well. I think bringing all sides to the table will be helpful. I want to stress that I'm not necessarily, I will not be upset if it does not change. As long as the process has been followed through and we've given an opportunity for all parties to participate, if it remains the same way as it is, that's fine as well. But I also want to make sure that we have given those individuals the opportunity, because we may have something better or something smoother because of it. So without objection, I will take the motion from Councilman Smith to table this until, what? Shields, sorry. Councilman Shields, to table this.
I've been called worse.
That's a bad one, though. That's a bad
That
one.
one's pretty rough.
I'll second.
When are you tabling it till?
Until Chase is ready to bring it back.
Without date? All right.
Yeah, I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Does that require a roll call? Awesome. All right, with that, we have met the end of our meeting. We do not have a closed session today, so we will.
Motion to adjourn.
Next meeting will be March 18th for the Planning Commission, March 24th for the.
Have to do it faster. We'll be here forever.
For the City Council work meeting at 5:30 and the regular meeting at 7. We will have a joint commission and Planning Commission and City Council meeting on March 31st. With that, I'm open to a motion.
Jared already made.
Want me to say it again? Motion to adjourn?
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This, I believe, is a